Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video we will go over the most useful Pokemon in each region. Not necessarily based on their fighting capabilities, although that might come into play, but based on how well they would do in their specific region. Like, very specific Pokemon might do better than the other ones, and they might be useful to the everyday, person in that region. However, I will not be including harder to catch Pokemon. Basically, if it's one of a kind, or if it's something like a starter. So I will not be including legendaries, pseudo-legendaries, starter Pokemon, end-of-game Pokemon, for instance, in Sinnoh, Garchomp. I won't be including that because, frankly, this whole list could be filled with nothing but legendaries. With that said, let's get into the first entry. First up, we have Kanto. Kanto, it's a fairly commercial region, inspired by a region of the same name in Japan, in Honshu. Celadon and Saffron City are both based on Tokyo, an economic powerhouse in Japan. Just like Tokyo, they are economic powerhouses. Kanto is more of a modernized place in Honshu. And just like in the real world, the same applies to the Pokemon world. That being said, I would probably say Electabuzz would be the best Pokemon for the region, given its strength to move more heavy objects, and its electric typing for the more modernized side of things, especially given the whole electric plant. It'd be very useful to have, especially if you're trying to build up a civilization. Electricity is invaluable, and Electabuzz would probably benefit a lot of people. But if you live near the seaports, I would probably say the Golduck would be. Because mostly, Electabuzz would probably die, to be honest. Given, electric types are severely weak against water types. He'd probably die. I'm gonna be honest. Next up, we have Jodo. And just like Kanto, it's based on one of the most populated areas of Honshu, which is Kansai, which, just like Jodo in Pokemon, is the more cultural in nature. Japanese culture resides in places like Kyoto and Osaka, beautiful places that hold the cultural areas, and just like the real world, that's the same for Jodo. Kyoto, in fact, is the basis for Ecruteak City, and Osaka is the basis for Goldenrod City. Given the less modern nature of the region, though, I'd say Miltank or Heracross would be the most useful. Miltank, due to the healing properties of its milk and the strength that it has for pulling farm equipment and just equipment in general. It's a beefy Pokemon. We all know the gym battle that it's just terrible in. I will never forgive you, Whitney. Next up, we have the Hoenn region. And Hoenn region, by far, is probably one of my favorite regions. It's one of the first games I ever played, and it was the first game I completed. But that being said, like every region, it's based on a real-world place. Junichi Masuda stated, its design is based on Kyushu. Hoenn displays numerous environments, however, the most important being the vast amount of water in the region. And most of the map is water. Usually a water type would probably be the best suit, or a flying type. However, given its tropical nature and tropical climate, other than the extreme hot or cold of the Hoenn region, I would have to say that Ludicolo would probably be the most useful Pokemon, traversing the rainforest side of Hoenn region, as well as the water itself. And since Gen 3 flying types would be harder to obtain than a Lotad and evolving it, I would say that Ludicolo would probably be the best fit, given its size and stature, and Hoenn birds weren't very beefy. They couldn't pick up a human and fly them across the map, and I don't think that they would do very well in the rainforest areas or the more tropical side of things. So I would definitely have to say Ludicolo would be the best fit for that region, given you could swim on its back, you could reach places that you probably wouldn't without, as well as traversing the rainforest climate, Hoenn, which are vast, but given its water grass typing, it's probably an invaluable Pokemon and probably one of the best. I would say that if I lived there, I'd probably have a Ludicolo. Next up is the Sinnoh region. Sinnoh, just like the Hoenn region, is probably one of my favorite regions, and it's another one that I started out playing. Platinum expanded my look on Pokemon, and it's the game that really got me interested in Pokemon. Especially the starters. Empoleon and Torterra are by far two of my favorite starters. That being said, Sinnoh is based on Hokkaido, the southern part of Sakhalin, a Russian island, and Kunashir, a Japanese island administered by the Russians. Sinnoh is vast, and the most defining feature of it is Mount Coronet, that divides Sinnoh into two places, the east and the west. Hence why Shellos evolves into two different forms, or not evolves, but has two different variants, being the east and west sides. Sinnoh is a more modernized region, however. The rough terrain makes me think, though, that Bibarel, given the most treacherous mountain areas and requiring strength that Bibarel has, but also the warmth of Bibarel's fur for the colder climates and the Snow Point region, as well as just Sinnoh in general. Sinnoh is a northern region, whereas Hoenn is more tropical. Sinnoh is more wintry, it's colder, it's better to have a Pokemon that has thicker fur and help out in colder climates. I would say that Bibarel is a good fit, especially with its strength. Bibarel has immense strength. As well as we all know that the one and only Pokemon god is Bidoof. He is by far the god of all gods. Stand aside, Arceus. We have our Lord and Savior, Bidoof, and Big Doof. Next up, we have the Unova region. And did you know, fun fact, that Unova is based on the words unum, meaning one, and nova, meaning new. I actually didn't know that until I researched this video, and I found it very interesting. Unova is based on the USA, mainly New York. Castelia itself is based on Manhattan, specifically the lower part. And Skybarrow Bridge is based on the Brooklyn Bridge. Go figure. With the expansive cities and urban environments, I'd say surprisingly I'm picking Garbodor over Girder. Garbodor is invaluable given the densely populated areas and mass garbage production. Garbodor's garbage absorption is invaluable. I would say it would be probably one of the best Pokemon to have, especially if you lived in a densely populated area in the Unova region. And with Garbodor, not even in just the Unova region, I would say in general, Garbodor is probably a very underrated Pokemon for the, everyday Joe Schmo. Next up, we have Kalos. And Kalos is based on metropolitan France due to its overwhelming beauty that actually played a part in naming Kalos. Kalos has many old castles and chateaux showing off its French inspiration. Between coastal, central, and mountainous Kalos areas, they're really diverse. This is also the reason that I introduced Mega Evolution. Not that it plays a big part in my decision making, given, Megas would probably be scarce, to say the least. I mean, you get Mega Stones, but they're not very plentiful. So to see an everyday Joe Schmo with a Mega Evolved Charizard or a Mega Evolved Lucario or a Abomasnow is rare. I mean, I imagine it does happen, but probably only for trainers, given you have to have a special band to even Mega Evolve, which I can't imagine the dude down at the Poke Center is probably going to have one. So with that being said, I would say that given the diverse areas and old styles of architecture, that I would say that Go-Go, without a doubt, is probably the most practical Pokemon since the diverse and almost overpopulated areas. I would say Go-Go is probably valuable, and it's probably one of the most useful Pokemon, given that even in the Kalos games, people are seen using them regularly. They're already used as a mode of transportation. So to say that it's not the most useful Pokemon, even by our world standards, I would say that that's a stretch. Next up, we have the Alola region. And to be honest with you, the Alola region is by far not at all my favorite. It's probably my least favorite. I absolutely hate the Alola region. The Alolan games are fine, and the battles and the Pokemon are great. I love those. I mean, other than the starters weren't great. Decidueye is arguably one of the best, but the other two, those ones are just, I'd rather forget about them. And Z moves, I'm going to be real with you, they suck. They're just Power Ranger moves with Pokemon. And I don't know, the moves just, they look silly. The one with Xerneas is hilarious. But other than that, they're just not great. But I digress. Alola is heavily inspired by Hawaii. Mele Mele, Akala, Ula Ula, and Pony Islands are all based on islands that make up Hawaii. Oahu, Maui, Hawaii itself, which is the main island, and Kauai, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, respectively, are the islands that make up Alola, which is very interesting. I didn't know that all of them were based on the individual islands in itself. From the heat of Wela Volcano to the frigid Mount Lanakila, the best Pokemon would probably be Beware. I mean, as long as you don't get on its bad side and it crushes you to death, because that Pokedex entry was just brutal. But between its immense strength and its fur, it's good in most areas. I mean, save for the volcano, but to be honest, any Pokemon should burn in a volcano. Although Pokemon isn't really realistic with its whole fire or electric or really any elemental problem, now that I think about it. Especially fire, because, I mean, that Charizard, man, it burnt so many people, as well as Pikachu just zapping the shit out of people. And, you know, Toxicroak doing the whole jab thing to Brock when he was being a perv. Given its usefulness, I would say that Beware would be the best Pokemon for the Alola region. Next up, we have the Galar region. Galar is based on the UK, mainly England, and some people say Wales, but I don't see it. I don't see Wales when I see the Galar region. I mean, just look at it. It's very UK inspired, and just England in general. It's just screaming bruv at me. Especially Hop. Hop is very bruvish. And also the DLCs, the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra, are based on the Isle of Man and Scotland, respectively. This is also the region that introduced Dynamax and Gigantamax, but it doesn't really play a big role into my decision making on what's the best Pokemon, given that Gigantamax itself, I mean, however useful, given like Machamp, his Gigantamax pulled ships from the ocean to save people. That'd be very useful. However, I don't think it's very practical to think that it would, like the day-to-day Joe Schmo would know how to Dynamax. And I think you have to have a Dynamax band to Dynamax your Pokemon at will. So the everyday Joe Schmo wouldn't be able to Dynamax or Gigantamax, which is the more useful. But between the farmlands, the castles, the fantastical areas, and the sprawling wildlands with ever-changing weather, I would probably say that Caporaja is the most practical. From field to city, this Pokemon would be an absolute boon, especially in the wild areas. A giant Pokemon to move across these giant fields with other very ravenous Pokemon that can hurt you would probably be a benefit to have a Caporaja. Not to mention the farmlands. I imagine Caporaja, with its immense size and strength, could probably till a field in a day or two. And especially with how massive its tusks are. So Caporaja in itself would probably be the best, no matter if you're in a city or the woods or in the wild area. Caporaja would be probably the best Pokemon to have in the Galar region. Now on to the last mention, and this is just a special mention because Sinnoh exists, but the Hisui region. The Hisui region is based in Sinnoh, of course, but it's based in Hokkaido as well, but before the Meiji Restoration, which restored Imperial rule, but better, kinda, to Japan. I say kinda because Imperial rule is just garbage no matter where you go. But I would say, given the feudal aspects and everything about it, the vast areas that you would have to traverse to go to each quote-unquote city, I would probably say that the most practical and useful Pokemon would be Weirdeer. Given that it's easy to obtain, it's easy to get, traversal with that Pokemon would be most valuable. You could make an argument for Ursaluna or Sneasler or Braviary, which would be an absolute benefit regardless of where you were at, but given that Weirdeer is the most easy to obtain out of all of the Lord Pokemon, not to mention that you could probably get a Stantler and evolve it into a Weirdeer, rather than going after the Lord itself. So I would have to give it to Weirdeer. But that concludes all of the region. That was my list for the most practical and useful Pokemon in every region in the main series games, relative to what we think is real-world people. But even though we talked about usefulness today, remember, your value isn't based on how much you do for others. And it's alright to do no more than getting up and taking care of yourself. Life can be difficult, and being burnt out can take its toll. I've been burnt out. So take your time. Get better. Get better at your own pace. It's okay to not be okay. But until next time, drink something, you beautiful meat mech.